On a California ranch where horses are bred and raised, a large herd of fallow deer also lived and grazed. Rancher Pete oversaw it all, helping nature manage all her bounty. The Walking Beam was a first-rate ranch, the jewel of the county. In springtime, all the does began to give birth to their fawns. In the lush green pasture grass, the baby deer curled up and slept while their mothers grazed. One day, the does were moved to a new pasture where the grass was fresh and tall. When Pete walked back to check the pasture that they had just left, he spied a small brown form lying in the shade of a pepper tree, a fawn just newly born. There was no way for Pete to tell which doe had left her fawn, because the does are very secretive about their young. Pete knew that he couldn't take the fawn to the new pasture, because if the doe did not claim the baby, the fawn would surely die. He knelt down and carefully lifted the baby deer into his arms and said, "Come on, little guy, you need some dinner." By this time, Pete knew that he had an orphan on his hands. He also knew that even when you do your best and everything you can, the little fawn was going to have a tough time if he was even going to make it at all. Rancher Pete carried the wide-eyed bundle back to the barn, and he gently put the fawn on a bed of straw in one of the stalls. "Hold on, little one," Pete said, "and I'll be back with some groceries. And don't you worry none. I'll take care of you." Rancher Pete was very wise in the ways of deer. When he returned, Pete gently took a hold of the fawn and fed him a bottle of milk. The little fawn drank gratefully. Later that night, Pete went back to feed the fawn again, and looking at the little orphan, his coat all brown with a few white spots, Pete softly said, "Good night, Mr. Brown. Or maybe I'll just call you Charlie." The next morning, Pete went straight out to the barn. He wasn't sure if he'd done enough, and would the fawn still be alive? Pete sighed as he opened up the stall door. But standing there right before his eyes was a sleepy little fawn who wanted breakfast. As the days passed, Charlie grew and grew. Everyone on the ranch loved Charlie. He was like a puppy dog. The kids at the ranch bought Charlie a collar, and he wore it very proudly. But the question was, what to do with an orphan fawn, away from the rest of his kind? And what will become of the orphan fawn? It weighed heavy on Pete's mind. Charlie wasn't a deer anymore. He hadn't learned deerly things. He wasn't wild, but he was a wild thing. One afternoon, Pete went to see Charlie and said, "Little buddy, I have a plan." Charlie's big eyes blinked and his ears twitched back and forth as Pete told him about his future. When Pete finished telling Charlie, he said, "Well, what do you have to say about that?" And the fawn answered by galloping in a circle around Pete and adding a little jump at the end. The next day at the Walking Beam Ranch, a truck and trailer arrived. This was Charlie's ride. A man and a lady got out. They owned a Christmas tree farm in the valley. Charlie was going to be part of Christmas. Why, who could get you into the Christmas spirit faster than a friendly little deer? They backed the trailer up to the barn, and Rancher Pete took off Charlie's collar. And the orphan fawn walked right up. Yep, Charlie marched inside. As the trailer left, everyone cheered. At Christmas, everyone in the valley stopped by the farm to say hi to Charlie. He was a real celebrity. He had a job, a home, and a family. Meanwhile, back at the Walking Beam, most every day, Pete would pass by Charlie's old stall and see the orphan fawn's collar displayed there on the wall. He'd pause long enough just to remember Mr. Brown, the orphan fawn that he'd found and named him Charlie. Rancher Pete still remembers that orphan fawn he saved, but a piece of his heart was in that trailer when Charlie left that day.